The year is 146 BC. The Mediterranean sun beats down mercilessly as you find yourself chained to a wooden bench in the suffocating darkness below deck of a Roman slave galley. The stench is overwhelming. Human waste, rotting flesh, and the acrid smell of fear permeate every breath you take. Above you, the rhythmic pounding of bare feet on wooden planks echoes like thunder as free sailors prepare for another day of hell on the open sea. You're about to experience 24 hours that would break most people within the first 60 minutes. This isn't some romanticized Hollywood version of ancient maritime life. This is the brutal reality of what it meant to be human cargo on one of Rome's most dreaded vessels. A floating prison where men were worked to death, literally rowing their lives away in service to an empire that saw them as nothing more than disposable machinery. But here's what's truly terrifying about this journey we're about to take together. Everything you're about to witness, every horrific detail, every moment of unimaginable suffering, actually happened to real people. Thousands upon thousands of human beings endured this exact nightmare, and most of them never saw dry land again. Archaeological evidence, historical records, and survivor testimonies paint a picture so disturbing that modern historians often struggle to convey just how nightmarish these conditions really were. Are you ready to discover why the mere mention of slave galleys struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest warriors? Why captured enemies would sometimes choose death over the fate that awaited them in the belly of these ships? And most importantly, why you, despite whatever physical and mental strength you might possess today, absolutely would not survive what's coming next? Stay with me, because we're about to descend into one of history's most brutal environments, where human endurance was pushed beyond every conceivable limit. This is your 24-hour nightmare aboard a Roman slave ship. Dawn breaks across the Mediterranean, but you wouldn't know it from your position 3 decks below the waterline. The only indication that morning has arrived is the sudden cacophony of shouting voices and the thunderous sound of heavy footsteps directly above your head. The ship's crew is beginning their daily routine, but for you and the 150 other souls chained to these rowing benches, the concept of day and night ceased to have meaning weeks ago. Your wrists are raw and bleeding from the iron shackles that connect you to the massive oak oar in front of you. These aren't the lightweight rowing implements you might imagine from modern recreational boating. Each oar weighs nearly 40 pounds and stretches over 20 feet in length. 3 men are chained to each oar, and you've been assigned to the middle position, which means you bear the brunt of the rowing motion while having the least control over the oar's movement. The man to your left has been here for 8 months. His name was Marcus, though he rarely speaks anymore. His eyes have taken on that hollow, distant stare that you've learned means someone's mind has retreated to somewhere far away from this floating hell. The scarred tissue around his wrists tells the story of countless failed attempts to free himself from his bonds. His body has adapted to this environment in ways that both fascinate and horrify you. His shoulders have grown unnaturally broad, his arms corded with muscle, but his legs have withered to almost nothing from months of disuse. To your right sits a man who claims to have once been a Germanic chieftain. He still possesses some of his original defiance, though it's been steadily crushed out of him day by day, stroke by stroke. Yesterday, he tried to refuse an order from the rowing master. The punishment was swift and brutal. 20 lashes with a leather whip embedded with small pieces of metal, delivered right here at his rowing position, while the rest of us were forced to watch and continue our rhythm. The rowing master himself is a sight that will haunt your dreams, assuming you live long enough to have dreams again. He's a former slave who earned his freedom through years of loyal service, and now he enforces discipline with the zealousness of someone who knows exactly how far men can be pushed before they break. His body bears the scars of his own time at the oars, but his eyes hold something far more terrifying than physical damage. They hold the complete absence of mercy. He carries with him a short wooden staff topped with a bronze knob, and he uses it liberally to maintain the rhythm. A tap on the shoulder means you're falling behind. A strike to the ribs means you're disrupting the timing. A blow to the head means you've committed some unforgivable offense, like collapsing from exhaustion or failing to respond quickly enough to a command. The rhythm itself is everything in this place. It's dictated by a large drum positioned at the center of the rowing deck, and its steady beat has become the heartbeat of your existence. Boom, pull, release, boom, pull, release. Hour after hour, day after day, week after week, the rhythm never stops, never varies, never shows mercy for human limitations. Men have died at their oars rather than break this sacred cadence, because breaking the rhythm means punishment for everyone within reach. But it's not just the physical demands that destroy men in this place. It's the complete and utter helplessness that seeps into your bones like poison. You cannot stand. You cannot lie down. You cannot turn around. You cannot even relieve yourself without permission. And that permission is rarely granted. When nature calls, you simply soil yourself and continue rowing, adding your own waste to the already overwhelming stench that permeates every surface of this floating nightmare. The food, when it comes, is barely worthy of the name. Twice a day, usually around what you estimate to be mid-morning and evening, buckets of a grey, watery gruel are passed down the rowing benches. The consistency varies from day to day, but the taste remains consistently revolting. Sometimes you can identify chunks of what might have been grain or vegetables, but more often it's an unidentifiable slop that exists solely to provide enough calories to keep you functional. Water is even more precious than food. Each man receives roughly 2 cups per day, delivered in a communal ladle that passes from mouth to mouth down each rowing bench. The water itself is stored in large clay amphorae that have been sitting in the ship's hold for weeks or months. And it tastes of algae, clay, and things you prefer not to identify. But you drink every drop that's offered to you, because dehydration in this environment means death, and death means your body will simply be unchained and thrown overboard to make room for a replacement. The heat is another enemy that never relents. During the day, the sun beats down on the wooden deck above, turning the entire lower section of the ship into a massive oven. The temperature regularly exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and with no ventilation except for a few small openings designed more for structural integrity than human comfort, the air becomes thick and oppressive. Men regularly collapse from heat exhaustion, and those who cannot be revived quickly enough are simply removed from their chains and replaced. At night, the temperature drops dramatically, and without any covering or insulation, the cold becomes equally brutal. Your sweat-soaked body has no way to regulate its temperature, and you find yourself shivering uncontrollably while still chained to your oar. Sleep is impossible in any meaningful sense. You might catch brief moments of unconsciousness, but the constant motion of the ship, the cramped position, and the ever-present threat of punishment keep your mind in a state of perpetual alertness. And we haven't even reached the worst part yet. The worst part comes when the ship encounters rough weather, and today, as you're about to discover, is one of those days. The first sign of trouble isn't something you see, but something you feel deep in your gut. The steady, predictable roll of the ship suddenly becomes erratic. The massive vessel begins to pitch forward and backward with increasing violence, and each movement sends waves of nausea through your already weakened body. But nausea is a luxury you cannot afford, because the drum continues its relentless beat, and the oars must keep moving regardless of what nature throws at this floating prison. When the first massive wave crashes over the deck above, you hear it like thunder rolling through the wooden hull. Seawater begins to trickle, then pour through the gaps in the planking overhead, mixing with the already horrific conditions below deck. The water is ice cold, a shocking contrast to the stifling heat, and it carries with it the taste of salt that burns your cracked lips and parched throat. But here's where the true nightmare reveals itself. In rough seas, the rowing becomes exponentially more difficult. But the Romans have a solution that pushes human endurance beyond every reasonable limit. The rowing master begins calling for double time. The drum beat increases to a pace that seems impossible to maintain, but failure to match it means immediate and severe punishment. Your muscles, already pushed to their breaking point during normal conditions, now scream in agony as you're forced to pull that massive oar twice as fast, while the ship lurches unpredictably beneath you. Sometimes the oar catches nothing but air as the ship rises on a wave, sending you and your benchmates crashing backward against your chains. Other times, the oar plunges so deep into a wave trough that the resistance nearly dislocates your shoulders. The man to your left, Marcus, begins to make a sound you've never heard before. It starts as a low moan, then builds to something between a sob and a scream. His body is finally giving out after 8 months of this torture, but there's nowhere for him to go. Nothing he can do except continue pulling until his heart simply stops beating. You watch in horror as blood begins to foam at the corners of his mouth, a sign that something vital inside him has ruptured. The Germanic chieftain to your right isn't faring much better. His earlier defiance has completely evaporated, replaced by a desperate, animal-like determination to survive the next stroke. Then the next. Then the next. His breathing has become ragged and shallow, and you can see his vision starting to blur from exhaustion and dehydration. Above deck, you can hear the crew shouting orders in Latin, their voices barely audible over the howling wind and crashing waves. Occasionally, a sailor will stumble down to the rowing deck, usually to check on the structural integrity of the ship or to deliver new orders to the rowing master. These brief glimpses of the outside world are both a relief and a torment, because they remind you that somewhere above your head, men are breathing fresh air and moving freely under an open sky. The ship's captain, when he makes his rare appearances below deck, is a figure that embodies everything terrifying about Roman efficiency and pragmatism. He doesn't see you as human beings suffering unimaginable torment. He sees you as engines, as pieces of machinery that either function properly or need to be replaced. His calculations are purely mathematical. How fast can he push you before you become completely useless? How little food and water can he provide while still maintaining adequate rowing power? How many of you can he afford to lose before the ship's speed becomes compromised? During particularly violent storms, some slave ships would actually seal the lower decks completely, trapping the rowers in total darkness to prevent seawater from flooding the rowing compartments. When this happens, the air becomes so thick and toxic that men begin to suffocate at their oars. The weaker ones simply slump forward in their chains, and their bodies remain there until the storm passes and they can be removed. But today's storm brings an additional horror that you weren't prepared for. Pirates. The first indication that something has changed comes when the drum rhythm suddenly stops. After hours, days, weeks of that constant beating, the silence is more terrifying than any sound could be. Then you hear it, the distinctive sound of grappling hooks biting into the ship's rail, followed by the clash of metal on metal as weapons meet above your head. Roman slave ships were valuable prizes for pirates, not just for their cargo, but for their human inventory. Pirates could either sell healthy slaves at the next port, or force them to row their own vessels. But the process of capturing a slave ship often meant that many rowers would be killed in the fighting, either by design or by accident. The rowing master begins unchaining select individuals from their oars, not out of mercy, but because he needs every available body to help defend the ship. If you're chosen for this duty, you're handed a crude weapon, usually just a sharpened piece of wood or a rusty knife, and pushed toward the stairs leading to the upper deck. Your legs, weakened from months of disuse, can barely support your weight, but you're expected to fight like a seasoned warrior. Or if you're not selected for combat duty, you remain chained to your oar in the darkness below, listening to the sounds of battle raging overhead. Men screaming, metal clashing, wood splintering. You have no way of knowing who's winning, whether you'll be freed by pirates or remain enslaved to Rome. In many ways, changing masters might actually be worse, because at least Roman slave ships followed certain brutal but predictable rules. Pirates were known for their creativity when it came to extracting suffering from their captives. The battle seems to last for hours, though in the darkness and confusion, time becomes meaningless. Bodies begin falling through the openings in the deck above, some Roman sailors, some pirates, all adding their blood to the already horrific conditions in the rowing compartment. The ship lurches violently as ramming tactics are employed, and you hear the distinctive sound of wood splintering as hulls collide. Then, as suddenly as it began, the fighting stops. The silence that follows is more terrifying than the battle itself, because you have no idea what it means for your immediate future. Heavy footsteps echo across the deck above, but these aren't the familiar sounds of Roman sandals on wood. These boots are different, heavier, more chaotic in their movement. Pirates have won, and your fate has just taken a turn that somehow manages to be even worse than what you've already endured. The first pirate to descend into the rowing compartment carries a torch that illuminates the carnage around you for the first time in what feels like days. The flickering light reveals horrors that the darkness had mercifully concealed. Bodies slumped over oars in positions that make it clear they died hours or even days ago, but were never removed. Men so emaciated, they look more like skeletons than living beings. Blood, both fresh and dried, coating every surface within reach. But what strikes you most about this pirate isn't his scarred face, or the collection of weapons hanging from his belt. It's his smile. He's genuinely enjoying what he sees down here, and that expression tells you everything you need to know about what's coming next. Pirates don't follow the cold, efficient brutality of Roman military doctrine. Their cruelty is personal, creative, and infinitely more unpredictable. The pirate captain, when he finally makes his way below deck, is a man who clearly understands the economics of human suffering. He walks slowly along each rowing bench, examining the slaves like a buyer at a livestock market. Some he marks with a piece of chalk, indicating they're worth keeping alive. Others receive a different mark, and you quickly realize these men are being selected for immediate disposal. They're too weak, too sick, or too broken to be of any value. Marcus, the man who's been chained beside you for these hellish hours, receives the second type of mark. His 8 months at the oars have finally caught up with him, and even pirates can see that he has nothing left to give. 2 crew members begin the process of freeing him from his chains, but not out of mercy. They're simply making room for a healthier replacement when they reach the next slave market. You watch in horror as Marcus is dragged toward the stairs leading to the upper deck. He doesn't resist, doesn't cry out, doesn't even seem fully aware of what's happening. His mind has retreated so far from this reality that his body is just going through the motions of existence. The last you see of him is his bare feet disappearing up those wooden steps, and you know with absolute certainty that he's about to be thrown overboard like discarded cargo. The Germanic chieftain to your right receives the chalk mark that indicates survival, but his relief is short-lived. The pirates have different ideas about how to motivate their rowing slaves, and their methods make Roman discipline seem almost gentle by comparison. Where Romans use systematic brutality designed to maintain long-term productivity, pirates employ random violence intended to create an atmosphere of constant terror. The new rowing master is a giant of a man whose body tells the story of decades spent in violent conflict. His arms are covered in scars from knife fights. His face bears the marks of countless battles, and his eyes hold the kind of madness that comes from a lifetime of inflicting pain on others. He carries with him not just the traditional wooden staff, but also a collection of more exotic instruments designed specifically for torture. His first demonstration of authority involves selecting a slave at random and subjecting him to a punishment so creative and brutal that describing it would test the limits of human decency. The message is clear. Under Roman rule, you knew what to expect if you broke the rules. Under pirate control, anything could happen to anyone at any time, for any reason, or no reason at all. The drum that had controlled your existence for so long is replaced with something far worse: complete unpredictability. Sometimes you row at a normal pace for hours. Sometimes you're suddenly ordered to row at maximum speed with no warning and no explanation. Sometimes you're forced to maintain an impossible rhythm until men begin collapsing at their oars, then ordered to stop completely and sit in absolute stillness for periods that stretch your sanity to its breaking point. Food becomes even more scarce under pirate control, but more disturbingly, it becomes a weapon of psychological warfare. Some days you receive nothing at all. Other days you're given portions so large that your shrunken stomach cannot handle them, causing violent illness that leaves you even weaker than before. The pirates seem to take genuine pleasure in watching starving men struggle to eat food that makes them sick. Water is now distributed not based on any systematic schedule, but according to the whims of whoever happens to be on duty. Sometimes the same slave receives multiple portions, while others get nothing. Sometimes the water is mixed with seawater or wine, creating a mixture that increases thirst rather than quenching it. The randomness of it all creates a constant state of anxiety that proves more psychologically damaging than the predictable deprivation you endured under Roman control. But the most terrifying change involves the pirates' attitude toward death. Romans viewed dead slaves as a loss of valuable property and made at least minimal efforts to keep you alive. Pirates see death as entertainment, and they've turned the rowing deck into their personal theatre of cruelty. Men are forced to watch as their benchmates are subjected to torments that serve no practical purpose beyond satisfying the crew's appetite for violence. The ship itself begins to deteriorate under pirate management. Romans maintained their vessels with military precision because they understood that a seaworthy ship was essential to their operations. Pirates are more focused on immediate gratification than long-term planning, and you can feel the vessel becoming less stable with each passing day. Repairs are made haphazardly, if at all, and the constant creaking and groaning of stressed wood suggests that the ship itself might not survive much longer. New slaves are brought aboard at irregular intervals, men captured from other vessels or purchased at markets in ports you cannot identify. They arrive in various states of physical and mental condition, but all share the same look of absolute terror when they see what awaits them below deck. You've become one of the seasoned veterans of this floating hell, and you find yourself offering whatever comfort you can to newcomers, even though you know it's ultimately meaningless. The night brings horrors that daylight somehow made bearable. In the complete darkness of the lower deck, sounds become magnified and distorted. The moans of dying men echo off the wooden walls. The chains rattle constantly as bodies shift in futile attempts to find comfortable positions. The rats that infest every part of the ship become bolder in the darkness, and you can feel them running across your legs and feet as they search for scraps of food or investigate the bodies of men who've died at their oars. Sleep, when it comes at all, brings nightmares that are often worse than the waking reality. You dream of your life before this ship, of faces and places that seem increasingly unreal with each passing hour. You dream of food and clean water and the simple pleasure of standing upright. But most often, you dream of death, and you begin to understand why so many men in this place simply choose to stop fighting and let their hearts give out from exhaustion. The pirates have introduced a new form of entertainment that pushes psychological torment to levels you didn't know existed. They force slaves to compete against each other for basic necessities like food and water. Men who've shared the same bench for months are suddenly turned against each other, fighting desperately for an extra cup of water or an additional portion of gruel. The winners receive their prizes, but the cost is watching their companions suffer even more than before. Some slaves crack under this pressure and become informants, reporting on their benchmates' conversations or plans for resistance in exchange for slightly better treatment. These collaborators are both despised and envied by the other slaves, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia that makes the already unbearable conditions even more psychologically damaging. The ship's course has become erratic under pirate control. where Roman vessels followed established trade routes with predictable stops for supplies and maintenance. This pirate ship seems to wander aimlessly across the Mediterranean. Sometimes you dock at legitimate ports where the crew conducts what appears to be normal business. Other times you anchor in hidden coves where other pirate vessels gather for meetings that last for days while you remain chained below deck. During these extended stops, the heat becomes absolutely unbearable. Without the cooling effect of the ship's movement through the water, the lower deck becomes a furnace that pushes human endurance beyond every conceivable limit. Men begin to hallucinate from dehydration and heat exhaustion. Some slip into comas from which they never recover. Others begin speaking to people who aren't there, carrying on conversations with family members they'll never see again. The smell during these periods defies description. Human waste, rotting food, decom stench of fear combine to posing bodies, and the acrid create an atmosphere so toxic that breathing becomes a conscious effort. Your nose has long since stopped registering most odors, but new levels of putrefaction continue to assault your senses in ways that make you understand why some men simply choose to stop breathing. Medical care under pirate control is non-existent. Where Roman ships at least made minimal efforts to keep valuable slaves functional, pirates view sickness and injury as natural selection. If you're strong enough to survive, you continue rowing. If not, you're disposed of to make room for a healthier replacement. Broken bones heal badly, or not at all. Infections spread unchecked through the cramped quarters. Open wounds become breeding grounds for maggots and worse parasites. The psychological impact of watching men deteriorate and die around you creates a form of trauma that changes something fundamental in your mind. You begin to view human life, including your own, as something temporary and disposable. The instinct for self-preservation that has kept you alive this long begins to weaken as the reality of your situation becomes undeniable. Yet somehow, impossibly, you continue to exist in this floating nightmare. Your body has adapted in ways that both amaze and horrify you. Your hands have developed calluses so thick they're almost like natural gloves. Your shoulders and back have grown powerful enough to handle the massive oar, even in your weakened state. Your mind has learned to retreat to safe places during the worst moments of abuse and torment. But as the hours drag on and the pirate's cruelty continues to escalate, you begin to understand a terrible truth about human endurance. There is a limit to what any person can survive, and you're rapidly approaching yours. The dawn of your second day aboard this pirate vessel brings a development that somehow manages to be even more horrifying than everything you've already endured. The ship has arrived at what the pirates call a processing station, a hidden cove where human beings are sorted, evaluated, and prepared for sale like livestock at market. You hear the anchor chain rattling as it's dropped, followed by the sound of smaller boats approaching the ship. Voices echo across the water in languages you don't recognize, haggling and negotiating over cargo that includes you and every other soul chained to these benches. The pirates aren't just raiders, they're businessmen, and you've just become part of their most profitable inventory. The first buyers to descend into the rowing compartment carry torches and ledgers, examining slaves with the detached professionalism of merchants evaluating grain or wine. They check teeth, feel muscle tone, and make notes about each person's apparent health and remaining useful life. Some slaves are marked for immediate sale to local mining operations. Others are tagged for shipment to distant markets, where different types of labor are in demand. But you notice something that chills your blood more than any torture you've yet experienced. Some slaves aren't being marked for sale at all. They're being selected for what the pirates call training, a process that involves breaking men so completely that they become willing participants in their own enslavement. These broken individuals will eventually become the rowing masters, overseers, and enforcers who maintain discipline on future slave ships. The selection process reveals the twisted economics of the slave trade. Younger, healthier specimens command premium prices and are treated with relative care to preserve their market value. Older or weaker slaves are sold in bulk to operations where life expectancy is measured in weeks rather than years. But the most disturbing category consists of those who show signs of leadership or intelligence. These men are marked for special treatment designed to destroy their capacity for independent thought. As the buyers make their selections, you're forced to confront the reality that your 24-hour nightmare aboard this ship was just the beginning. The slave markets of the ancient world offer destinations that make rowing galleys seem almost pleasant by comparison. Salt mines where men work naked in toxic environments until their lungs give out. Stone quarries where the constant dust slowly blinds and suffocates workers. Agricultural estates where slaves are worked literally to death during harvest seasons. The Germanic chieftain beside you has been selected for gladiator training, a fate that might seem preferable until you understand what it actually entails. Gladiator schools weren't romantic training grounds for heroic warriors. They were factories for producing disposable entertainment, places where men were taught to kill each other for the amusement of crowds who viewed their deaths as casual diversion. Your own fate becomes clear when a buyer approaches with a different type of ledger. You've been selected for household service in a wealthy Roman villa, which sounds almost luxurious until you realize what this actually means. House slaves often lived longer than those in mines or galleys, but they endured different types of torture, complete psychological domination, the constant threat of sexual abuse, the requirement to witness and sometimes participate in the torture of other slaves, the slow erosion of every aspect of human dignity over years or decades. But perhaps most terrifying of all is the realization that some part of you is actually relieved by this news. After the unimaginable horrors of the slave galley, any change seems preferable. This reaction horrifies you more than any physical torture could, because it reveals how completely this experience has altered your fundamental understanding of what human existence should be. The process of being transferred from ship to shore involves a level of dehumanization that exceeds even what you've already experienced. You're stripped of what remains of your clothing, hosed down with seawater like an animal, and chained together with other merchandise for the journey to market. The iron collar placed around your neck bears inscriptions indicating your approximate age, origin, and intended use, reducing your entire existence to a few lines of utilitarian text. 24 hours. That's all it took to show you the unthinkable reality faced by countless souls throughout history. From the relentless rhythm of those massive oars to the complete destruction of human dignity, you've witnessed horrors that most people couldn't endure for 24 minutes. The stench, the chains, the systematic brutality designed to break not just bodies, but spirits. This wasn't fiction or Hollywood drama. This was the calculated machinery of human suffering that powered an empire. Every detail you experienced happened to real people who had hopes, families, and dreams before they disappeared into the belly of these floating prisons. Most never returned. Their stories died with them in the darkness below deck, forgotten by history, but no less real for being unrecorded. If this glimpse into humanity's darkest chapters disturbed you, remember that understanding these truths is the only way we can ensure they never happen again.